recording. Okay. Here we go. It's time for Clubhouse Chatter. Here's Norm Ordez.
Hey, well, thanks a lot, Brian. Here in wet Oregon. Man, we are flooding everywhere up here in Western Oregon. I think we set a new record for like total rainfall in like a 24-hour period of all time, like close to 3 inches for whatever, December 7th. And I think we got, 2 to 4 more inches coming, Brian?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. It's not going to stop, and then the winds are going to pick up tonight, so be careful out there.
So we got roads falling apart everywhere. We got floodwaters everywhere, so be safe. So our next gentleman is a Northwest legend, sports radio personality, and I'm really excited to have him on because I moved to Oregon in 1989, and so that's when I first started listening to Scott Lynn, of course being on KEX all those years, and he was just everywhere, and he goes back to the days of like, Ed Whalen and Steve Arena, and he's one of those guys. He's like I said, a legend. Got one of the greatest pictures ever of them in the Portland Beaver baseball uniforms. You remember that picture?
Oh, absolutely, on the cover of the program.
Yep. And so our guest is Scott Lynn. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Hey, well, thanks for coming on. And so Scott has been known as one of the hardest workers in the business, and I kind of look at that and being a baseball guy, but not being a baseball guy. I never played Major League Baseball or minor league baseball. I've got to work my tail off at doing what I'm getting, and I look at people like you and Brian, who have done it in the past, and you guys like paved the way for somebody like me. And so, hard work, it's what it's all about. And, I want to bring passion of baseball to everybody and worldwide. And here we are. And so,
well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I will say that I enjoyed my work, and that made it possible for me to, enjoy going to work every day. I will tell you that at the end of the run, after all those many, many years, the last couple of years, I was working 16-hour days, 6 and 7 days a week, because I was basically in charge of the sports on both KEX and on Fox Sports 620, which is now Rip City Radio. I was doing sports reports and talk shows and everything on both stations, and when they laid me off, it was almost a godsend, because it allowed me to finally work on this book that I had in the back of my mind for about 5 or 6 years.
And so you do have a new book out. It's called Sports Idols. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it is basically an oral history. I talked to over 200 high-profile athletes. I mean, we're talking Hall of Famers, dozens of Hall of Famers, the likes of Walt Frazier, Jerry West, Rick Barry, Clyde Drexler, Gary Payton, Bill Walton, Coach K, Jack Ramsey, Yogi Berra, Bobby Dorr, Brooks Robinson, Joe Torre, Ozzie Smith, Tony Gwynn. From golf, Nancy Lopez, Annika Sorenstam, Beth Daniel, Mario Andretti, AJ Foyt, Phil Esposito, and Grant Fuhr from hockey. Basically, I tried to get as many legends, past and present, that I could. I got them talking about their very first childhood idol. Who was your very first sports hero? And I asked them what it was like to meet them. Did they live up to your expectations when you met them for the first time? And did you meet them as a kid, or was it as an adult? I think, Norm, Brian, the bottom line is we all had somebody, I think most of us at least, had somebody that we looked up to when we were a child. It might have been a family member. It might have been a brother, a sister, a mom or dad, or an uncle or a grandfather. Could have been a coach, maybe your very first youth coach. But, I mean, we all had somebody that we emulated. It could also be the sports figures, obviously, somebody we saw in magazines or newspapers, or we saw at the ballpark. The sports heroes of the day. So those might be the people that we pretended to be when we were out in the yard playing wiffle ball or in the driveway, shooting baskets in the driveway. We had somebody, for the most part. Almost all of us did. And I always wondered, And I often incorporated it into the interviews I did with people when I was hosting the sports talk shows. Who did you grow up idolizing? And I didn't use any of those interviews because that was copyrighted material. So I avoided that. But I did put away, I saved some 200 interviews that I had stockpiled for myself that I'd used my own gear to talk to these athletes. Who was your idol, and what was it like to meet him? And that's what this is. It's a Q&A with me asking them about their idols, and it was kind of fascinating. I left it sort of open-ended. I just said, who was your first childhood idol? Some interpreted it to mean a sports athlete. Some interpreted it just pure and simple. My first person I looked up to was my mom or dad, or whatever it might have been. I just left it open. So it's really a compilation of however they wanted to interpret that question. And it really turned out to be a wonderful project. It was the kind of thing that I could work on for years and years without ever having to put it on paper, because the first idol is never going to change. Who was your first idol? The answer to that question should be the same whether it was 5 years ago or 15 years from now. So I felt like I could store these, and when I would get laid off, which in this changing industry that we have, I knew was going to come at some day, I thought at that point I'll write this book. I'll compile this thing, and that's what this is. Sports Idols, First Heroes of Our Heroes is the subtitle, and it's 569 pages of fun for the sports fan. Mostly baseball, mostly basketball, because, number one, basketball had access to a lot of people in the NBA in Portland.
Right.
And secondly, because baseball is my favorite sport. So I interviewed whoever I wanted to for baseball.
Nice. Did you have a couple of guys or gals that really kind of shocked you with their answer?
Well, I would say that I was a little bit surprised every time this happened, that somebody who was a star in their particular sport told me about their idol being somebody from a different sport. Jack Ramsey, for instance. You expect it to be a basketball player, or at least I did.
Right.
But this was Mel Ott, the Hall of Famer. He said he grew up in Connecticut and was close enough to New York. He was a New York Giants fan, and he even went to a World Series game in 1933 between the Giants and the Senators. And Mel Ott, the little guy that hit all those home runs, he said he was the guy. He was a star, and he said he even waited one time when he was a kid to get an autograph from him and things like that. So, and I found that over and over again. Jack Jewsbury of the Portland Timbers told me he grew up in Missouri, near enough Kansas City. He was a Kansas City Royals fan. So George Brett was the guy he grew up idolizing. And I found that over and over again. Julie Inkster grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, the golf legend. She was a baseball nut as a kid, and she pretended to be Juan Marichal when she was playing youth baseball. And she said with the whole high leg kick and everything. So I guess the one thing that, if you can call it a big surprise, was there were a number of athletes. Percy Hawkins, who's in the front office with the Trailblazers there, working with the players, he told me his first idol was Harold Baines. He was a White Sox fan growing up in Illinois. So I saw that over and over again with people who were professional in some sport. They didn't always necessarily idolize a person in their own sport.
So who was your idol?
Well, I talk about in the book in the preface that it was Stan Musial. Stan retired when I was 9 years old. I grew up in central Illinois, and I was a third-generation Cardinals fan. My dad would take me to Old Busch Stadium, the first Busch Stadium, Sportsman's Park, as it was originally called. And we watched Musial. I still have scorecards from when I was 5 and 6 years old in 1959 and 60. When they back in the day when they actually printed the starting lineup in the scorecard and sold those scorecards for a nickel or a dime. And it came with a pencil too, by the way, if you if you had that time. But I still have those scorecards, and bottom line was Musial was one of the greatest players in National League history. And certainly at that time, his career was winding down. But even late in his career, he still could hit the ball. He was a remarkable hitter and an even better person. And there is a chapter in the book in which I talked to people who mentioned, hey, Stan Musial was my guy too, and I mean, we're talking about some true legends of the game. Brooks Robinson was one of those. Rod Thorne, who was one of the big shots in the NBA. Mm-hmm. He grew up a Musial fan. Harry Gallatin, who's an NBA Hall of Famer or a basketball Hall of Famer. He grew up as a Musial fan. So bottom line was there were a lot of people who also had Stan the Man as their idol. And the bottom line is he was my guy. And I was blessed to get a chance to meet him at one point. It was actually when I was working in Tampa, St. Petersburg back in the late 70s. I met him at spring training and did some freelance work for a TV station out of St. Louis, and they had me interview Stan and feed the interview back up to the station there. And I got to meet my idol. And since that time, while working in this business, I got to meet Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and Tim McCarver and all these other St. Louis Cardinals who I was a fan of when I was a little kid. And I just started that. I think that was the genesis of this whole project was how much it meant to me to meet these childhood idols, even if it was when I was an adult. What about the guys that are superstars or Hall of Famers? Who did they look up to when they were a little kid? And it was really fun to go back and the thing that I thought was really cool, Norm. You know how it is when you go up and you're going to interview an athlete. Today's athletes in particular, they look at the media as a necessary evil, I think, in many cases.
Right.
But you walk up and ask them, who was your first childhood idol? Who was your childhood idol? Almost every time their eyes lit up, they started smiling. It took them right back to being a kid, and they answered almost every time. They told me who it was, and it took them back, I think, to being a kid again. And sometimes they would say, "Man, nobody's ever asked me about that." So that's when I knew I had something that this is going to be pretty cool, and I think people are really going to enjoy reading about all these different legends.
So as a professional like yourself, what was it like interviewing Stan? I mean, you had to get butterflies. I know my favorite player growing up was Dale Murphy. And to this day, I mean, I've chatted with Murph a couple of different times and tried to get him on the show and stuff like that. Man, I still get butterflies. And, he just tells me, I'm just one of the guys. I mean, what was that like interviewing such a legend like Musial?
Well, it was fun to be kind of, I was a professional broadcaster at that point. I was probably only about 24 years old when I met him, so I was very early in my career. And I just remember how I was thinking, man, this is number 6. This is the guy who would peek over his right shoulder, the left-handed batter, that held straight up in the air. And this was the guy. He was a little older than I remember, but then again, so was I. I will add another thing. Bob Gibson had pitched the Cardinals into 3 World Series in the 60s when I was a kid. And so Gibson was another of my idols. But I had the real privilege, and going to your point about being nervous, I had the privilege of meeting Gibby at back-to-back years at Maurice Lucas's charity fundraiser over in Pendleton at the Wild Horse Resort Casino, and they would have a fundraiser every year. And Maurice invited me to come over and be a celebrity a couple of years. I think a couple people backed out. He was just looking for some celebrity to come over and play. But I got to meet Bob Gibson and hang out in the green room, if you will, a suite where everybody was swapping stories. And there I was with all these athletes, including my hero. And that was amazing. I even thank, at the end of the book, I thank the late Maurice Lucas for inviting me so that I could meet one of my boyhood idols. In that situation, especially with Gibson's demeanor, then and even still today, I was a nervous wreck around him. He was nice. He was pleasant enough because I was in the green room along with all the other athletes. But the bottom line was, he had that intensity, even as a 65, 70-year-old man, that, boy, you don't mess with Bob Gibson ever. So it was pretty cool to be able to hang out with him for back-to-back years.
And, the way I look at it, as well, and I don't know if you looked at it the same way, it's like, with me, when I interview baseball players, number one, I'm not a former player. I'm just a media guy who's trying to do a show. And so, I kind of wonder sometimes what they think of you. And I remember interviewing Bob Boone in Eugene this last summer. And so I interviewed Bob, and then next thing I know, I find myself sitting in his suite at PK Park drinking beer and having nachos with him and just talking baseball for 4 innings. And he's just a normal guy, and that's how they are. They want to be treated just like, you and I. Everybody looks up to them and think of them as gods and stuff, but just men,
Yeah, no, that's the one thing that comes out, I think, in the book a little bit, is that these guys were just kids like you and me, and they happened to have a skill that allowed them to grow up, develop their skills, and become a professional athlete, which puts them in a different class, obviously, as far as skill, but they were still just people. Steph Curry is one of those that I interviewed for the book, and he talks about how different it is today than when he was growing up, because he said he would have been all over Twitter trying to reach out to Reggie Miller, one of the guys that he was enamored by when he was growing up. He says that he is able to connect with all of those kids following him because they send tweets to him and he can read it. They really connect. And he says it's just a whole different era. But I thought that was kind of a fascinating touch that he says, look, hey, they can reach their heroes now. They can actually tell us what they're thinking. We don't have to respond, but we can see it. And that's a whole different deal with the social media today. You mentioned Dale Murphy, by the way. Scott Brocious told me that Murph was his guy.
Yeah.
And he told a great story that I put in the book about there was a charity fundraiser, and Scott Brocious had donated an autographed baseball for the auction. And it turns out they read off what was the auction, and then there was also a drawing. Well, he drew his own baseball. He got his own baseball. He won the ticket they announced. He got his own. He won his baseball. So he went up to the lady running the auction and said, "Hey, I'm I just won this, and the name on there, that's me. It's my ball." And she says, "Well, why don't we just switch out? Take one of these other ones." He looked down and saw Dale Murphy, MVP, and he said, "Can I have that ball?" She goes, "Yeah, go ahead." He said, "I feel so bad for somebody because they thought, they actually had won a Dale Murphy ball, but instead they got a Scott Brocious ball because I got the Murphy ball."
And that's okay too. I knew that about Scott, and I've had that conversation with Scott a few times.
You?
Absolutely. And Scott is one of the most down-to-earth guys. So I've worked in minor league baseball. I've worked for the Diamondbacks organization and the Giants organization, and I would bounce things off of Scott when I'd see him around town, about what organizations are good and stuff like that. And so I haven't seen him in a while, but his son.
Sure.
His son would work for McMinnville Parks and Rec, and so he would be in my gym reffing basketball, and I'd get to see Scott and Jennifer, and it's great guy.
Cool.
And I knew that about Scott and Dale, and we've had that conversation a couple of different times.
Yeah.
Was there? Go ahead.
I'll tell you, this was so fun. Talking to Brocious, talking to all these different people. Just the stars of today. I talked about some of the Hall of Famers earlier, but the present day people are, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard, D. Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, Alex Morgan, Christine Sinclair, Jacoby Ellsbury, Michael Conforto, all the LPGA players seemingly past and present. And then I'm an IndyCar fan, so I got, like I said, AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti. I got all of the Unsers, Bobby and Al Jr. I got Bobby and Graham Rahal, Elio Castroneves, Scott Dixon, Will Power. And then Greg Biffle and Shoney Schimmel and Mario Zagunis, who carried the flag for the U.S. team. Yep. But you talk about baseball, and I know this is a baseball show. I love I've probably spent 20 minutes with Ken Griffey Jr. I get Vida Blue, Steve Garvey, Dale Murphy, Dave Henderson, Joe Carter talking about his home run, Chris Chambliss and Tommy John and Mickey Lolich and Dave Stewart. Two of my favorites, because growing up a Cardinal fan in the 60s, Dick Groat and Bill White. Mm-hmm. They were all-stars for the Cardinals in the early 60s, and I spent a lot of time talking with both of them. I had no idea, really, that Dick Groat was such a great basketball player. He was a many-time all-star both with the Pirates. He was on the World Championship team in 1960, and then with the Cardinals. Grote was an All-American at Duke in both basketball and baseball, and Grote, his jersey was the first one retired in Cameron Indoor Stadium as a basketball player.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea. But, that was fun. Don Larson, Carl Erskine, I mean, it just goes on and on. I just had so much fun going back and talking to all these people about their childhood idols. Jerry West, I mean, how fun was that?
I enjoy, so I've had Erskine on the show, 4 or 5 times, and I get him on around Jackie Robinson Day every year, and have him come on and talk about Jackie Robinson. That is
one of the nicest men ever.
Absolutely, really. One of my favorite things to do is to talk to the older players. Your Bobby Doerr. I got Bobby Winkles down in Southern California, first head baseball coach at Arizona State. George Genovese, who was a scouting legend for the Dodgers and Giants, who just passed away at the age of 93. They talk about playing back in the 40s and 50s, and just, it's just a whole different game now.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's the thing. I talked to a number of guys who played back in that era. Joe Garagiola, I can imagine Yogi Berra. They were neighbors. They lived across the street from each other in St. Louis, and they both had, a guy who was, was very famous as far as lore in St. Louis. Ducky Medwick, Joe Ducky Medwick was their idol. It turns out that Yogi, when he was a kid, would stand on a street corner and sell newspapers, and one of his customers who always drove by was Ducky Medwick. That's how he met his boyhood idol. So amazing stories of how they, connected with some of these people. Sports Idols is kind of it really does say what this book is all about. It's our sports idols, and it's really been a lot of fun to put it together. I mean, it's on Amazon. You can, everybody defers to that. I do want to mention, if anybody wants an autographed copy, I'd be happy to do that. Just email me at sportsidols@gmail.com. I mean, that's a blatant plug here, but I do want to get that out in case anybody wants an autographed copy.
Absolutely. So let's go to your time in Portland a little bit. Do you have give us a couple of favorite moments in Portland for you as sports radio?
Well, I came there in 1980 at Channel 8, and I was there for 9 years. First as the weekend sports guy, and then as the sports director for 7 years. And there were a lot of, when I was doing that, that was a fun time to be. It was kind of a golden era, if you will, of TV broadcasting. I mean, you could travel with teams, you could go do stuff. I mean, the Portland Beavers were in town, and I went to spring training in 1983. Can you imagine now somebody sending a TV crew from Portland to go to spring training in Florida?
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I went, and that was when Steve Jeltz and Charlie Hudson and there were a bunch of guys, John Russell. They were all on that team. And what turned out to happen, that was in 1983, spring of '83. They end up. Two things happened. The Phillies make it to the World Series that year. The station sent me to Philadelphia to cover the Beaver players in the World Series. And again, that doesn't happen. That wasn't even our local team, but a few of the players had an impact. And so that was, and then also that was, I think it was '83. That was the year that the Portland Beavers won the PCL, went to the AAA World Series. I think they had one AAA World Series between the International League winner, the PCL winner.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, my memory is not the same as it used to be. But that was a lot of fun. But the one thing probably that stands out, I think more than anything else, obviously would be when my first year, I left Channel 8 to host a talk show in Portland, Sportsline. It was before all the all-sports stations, before the Internet, and there were only 2 all-sports stations in the country, I think, at that time. KFAN and WFAN. So New York and Minnesota, I think, were the only 2 all-sports stations at the time. So I was able to get people on all the time and talk to them about, anything and everything. And back then, it was so novel. I remember I had Tim McCarver and some of these guys on for an hour. They would stay on for an hour and talk and take calls from the fans. So that was a lot of fun. But that was also that very first year that I went to KEX to host the talk show, I was doing the fifth quarter as well. And that very first year of the 1989-90 season, the Blazers go all the way to face the Pistons in the finals. And the next year, they had the best record in the NBA and got upset by Magic and the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. And the next year, it's the Blazers and Bulls in 1992. And it was Clyde was the second best player in the league, right behind Jordan, who was the best player in the league. It spurred a video game, Blazers versus Bulls. That was the best. That 3-year run is the best 3-year run in Portland Trail Blazers history. And I was hosting the fifth quarter at Tony Roma's during all that. Standing room only. Brian would remember that, I think. It was just a great time. We would meet during the postseason. We would meet to go out to the Hillsborough Airport. Bob Miller and I would set up a big PA system and interview the players as they got off the plane. It was a remarkable time. And so that was it. That was the very best. That's a memory that will never go away.
I first moved to Oregon in 1989, and I remember all that. I remember, Tony Romo's, great place to get ribs, and
yes,
yeah, you're absolutely right. That was, and I hate to say it, but I'm not a big NBA fan, and I followed the Lakers, but like I said, Portland, you could not hate the Portland Trailblazers. Absolutely not. I mean, Drexler, and he's second best player, in that game that Jordan had.
Right.
Man, what was that, game 3 or 4, I think?
Well, that whole series was remarkable, and the Blazers, I think, took it 6, and I mean, they really gave the Bulls all they could handle, and the Blazers let 1 or 2 of those games get away, too. So, I mean, they could have easily been NBA champions, but when you think about it now, and I interviewed Rick Appleman for the book, and a number of the players. I mean, Terry Porter, and I tried to get as many of those guys as I could. But the bottom line was that was a special time in all of our lives. It just really was. Nobody expected that. I mean, I think that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was Rick's first full season as the head coach of the Blazers. So he'd been named interim head coach, I think, the previous season. I think it was Mike Schuler got let go. And bottom line, it was sort of unexpected that first year, and then they were so good. Buck Williams was one of the guys that really turned the corner. I mean, he was the missing piece to the puzzle. I do want to share one thing about the book that was a little bit frustrating. I got done in my career as a broadcaster when I would go up to ask someone if they would do an interview. If they said yes, that is verbal consent in my book, and they answer the question. And so everybody that I went up and asked about, would you like to do this book for this, or do an interview for this book project? It's about your childhood heroes. If they said no and walked away, hey, no hard feelings, thanks. I get it. You didn't want to be part of it. But if they said yes, okay, we're on. Bottom line, when I submitted the manuscript in late August, I was told immediately by the publishing company, well, where are all your signed consents from every player? I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, in publishing, you have to have signed consents. So starting the first week of September and for the next 6 weeks, all I did was try to go back to the 200 people I had interviewed. I didn't get everybody, and I lost a few people that I couldn't get back to circumstances. Chris Bryant, National League Rookie of the Year.
Right.
I had interviewed him. I couldn't get through the Cubs or his agent or people who knew him or the University of San Diego. And the reason being, Cubs were in the postseason. When I was trying to get, September, October, right when all this was happening, they weren't about to be distracted by the guy looking for a signed consent. So I lost some key people, and it really is disappointing. Some of these athletes that I'd interviewed, I saw them at charity events and things like that. So I lost some key people, but I'm just so happy with almost 150 athletes that are in the book. And it's, like I said, it's a lot of great names. You're talking about Trailblazers, Michael Thompson and Terry Porter and Kiki Vandeweghe and Brandon Royce. But there's local guys like crazy. As you and Brian can imagine, I have a Rolodex of phone numbers, of home numbers and cell phone numbers that probably is rivaled by I don't think anybody has the Rolodex I have. And so I was able to call all these people years later and say, hey, you want to do this? And so I feel very happy. Even though I lost some key guys, I'm very pleased with Sports Idols.
Wow. So Sports Idols by Scott Lynn, and it's available on Amazon. And plug it again for us.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. There's an ebook available at $3.99. It's a paperback book, and thankfully it is, because otherwise it would probably weigh about 10 pounds. It's 569 pages. It's not as big as a Bible, but it's filled with great stuff. And it is available at Amazon or authorhouse.com. Authorhouse was the publishing company. But again, I do have some copy. I bought some books as inventory so that I could sign copies for friends and relatives and things like that. I do have some books, so I'd be happy to sign them. Just email me at sportsidols@gmail.com.
Will do. So how is University of Tampa going to shape up for baseball season in 2016?
Well, you know what they do here? They reload. I'm calling their games on a stream. TampaSpartans.tv is what it's called, and it's on the University of Tampa website, TampaSpartans.com. It's a ton of fun. I called their games last year, along with Jack Ike, who was a broadcaster who came down here and semi-retired from Wisconsin. And they ended up winning the D2 championship last year. They had a rough season. They had a bunch of injuries and things like that, but they got hot at the right time, just made the postseason, and then just took care of business. It was their 7th national championship. I think they're 5th in like 9 years or 8 years. They're really good. Now, they had a senior-laden team, but the one thing that happens in D2 here in particular is anybody who's a good baseball player, even a D1 player, they can come here and play immediately. So we see a lot of transfers from Florida State, junior colleges, obviously. The freshmen don't see much playing time here at the University of Tampa in the early going because they literally reload every year. So the baseball team is going to be very, very good again. They had a guy who won, Casey Scoggins, who reminded me a lot of Jacoby Ellsbury. In fact, Ellsbury is his idol. He was the center fielder, made the diving catches and stuff like we used to see Ellsbury making catches. And I think he might have a chance. He won the National Gold Glove for small school defensive excellence. So, and he's back. He was just a junior, so he'll be back. And I think they'll reload. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is again this year they're going to open spring training with another exhibition game against the Phillies. You might remember, Norm, that last year they did this, and I called the game on MLB.com through the Tampa stream as well, and they beat the Phillies. Now, it wasn't the Phillies frontline guys, but one of the guys, Giovanni Alfonso, hit a grand slam in the 8th, and they beat him 8-4. They beat the Phillies, and that got a lot of play on ESPN and everything else. So it was a lot of fun. And again, as anybody would know, working any D2 sports, you don't make a lot of money. It's not about the money now. It's just about me having a good time and having some fun. And it's a class school, a class coach, the athletic department. They have facilities, frankly, that rival Oregon State. And for a D2 program, I mean, it's pretty impressive. So I'm very happy to be involved. I call their men's and women's basketball as well as their baseball, and just have a great time, having a lot of fun.
So what you're saying is you're enjoying Tampa.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was not a fan of the hot, muggy, buggy summers. It's unbelievable, but we finally have good weather. You talked about the rain in the Northwest right now. Sorry to hear that. Today, I think our high was 76 or 77, and it was sunny. We have no chance of rain the entire week, and the humidity is gone. So this is maybe like the first week since March where I haven't felt like I was ready to burst into flame from all the humidity. But it's really nice right now. A great night. I live about, a half mile, maybe a mile from the Gulf of Mexico beaches, and we go take pictures of sunset and post them on Facebook and make our Northwest friends and family just a little bit jealous.
Just a little bit. So once again, Mr. Scott Lynn. Scott, thank you for coming on the show. Let's do this again.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys, I do miss the Northwest because I prefer the cool and a little drizzle. Now, I don't want the serious rain like they're having now, but, I'll be coming back to visit sometime, and I'll let you guys know.
Sounds good. Once again, Scott Lynn, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Scotty.
You're welcome, you guys. Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
I'm trying to remember, too,